tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Homage to the Blessed One, the Worthy One, the Fully Enlightened One. So I wanted to talk today, this third full day of retreat, about a topic that I think would be relevant, because the third day, without putting ideas in your head or making a judgment, we don't want to make judgments during retreat. But nevertheless, there is the reality that we've been working hard for 3 days. The first night, it's kind of novel and new, it's just an introduction. The next full day is still relatively new. And then the day after that, it gets a little more difficult. And by the third day, you start to feel muscles and areas of the body we didn't know we had before. And we have to encounter things like muscle strain, boredom, aches and pains, rampant thoughts, and things of that nature. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the paramita, or in Theravada we call it parama, or perfection, of Khanti, which has been translated as patience. But as we'll see, it's actually much more than that. And I prepared this Dhamma talk for a retreat at my temple, and I reduced it to writing, so bear with me if I read a bit from it and then talk as well, and it helps me to organize my thoughts. Khanti, Parama, is one of the 10 perfections in Theravada Buddhism. In Mahayana Buddhism, there's generally 6 perfections, but in Theravada we have 10. It's commonly referred to as the parami of patience, and while patience is a part of this perfection, it actually means a lot more than the usual meaning that we give to the word patience. Another term which is often used is patient endurance, or patient forbearance, or just endurance or forbearance. The previous parami, before patience, is virya, or energy. And that energy gives us the fuel, the energy to make the effort, to muster the energy to endure. Khanti is the actual doing of it. So virya provides the gasoline, and then the Khanti is the doing of it. Similarly, to forbear means to bear before. To bear before what? To bear before acting. To abstain from doing something before one acts. This suggests non-action, non-reactivity in the face of something. So often, the doing that we are doing with Khanti, with patience, is non-doing. But because of our defilements, non-doing is often very difficult, and we react, and we respond, sometimes inappropriately. The Buddha said, Khanti paramam tapotitika, nibbānam paramam vadanti Buddha. Forbearing patience is the highest austerity. Nibbāna is supreme, say the Buddhas. Forbearing patience. Forbearing patience is to accept the negative or painful actions of another, speech of another, or to undergo hardships without reacting, without doing or responding in an unskillful or unwholesome way. Thus, Khanti has been defined as, quote, patient endurance of suffering inflicted upon oneself by others and the forbearance of others' wrongs. So as a general statement, Khanti involves this quality of tolerance in the face of trying circumstances. The Buddha talks about this in the Samyutta Nikaya, the connected discourses, In the Saka Samyutta, the praising Saka's exhortation to the other devas, Saka being the king of the gods. He says, quote, "Do not let anger overpower you. Do not become angry at those who are angry. Do not become angry at those who are angry." Even though that's when one's anger may seem most urgent and be most triggered, when someone is angry at us, that's when it's most important to exercise Khanti, to exercise patience. An angry person can get further angered if we reply to that anger with anger ourselves. We escalate their anger when they're met with our own anger, and this often results in a mutual escalation. And our responses, when we act out of anger or frustration, is not going to be a wise one. If we react with anger, it'll be one that we most likely will regret. We cannot make wise decisions if we're aflame with anger, or if we're aflame with impatience, unkhanti, and this applies to choosing which course of action to take. Anger clouds the judgment in a big way. It removes the whole panoply of possibilities from our repertoire and gives us tunnel vision, where our responses are limited to mostly unskillful ones. If we act out of anger, we usually experience regret and remorse later when the anger subsides. Has anyone here acted out of anger and then felt sorry for something they had said or done? Of course. Thus, the Buddha teaches us that eradicating anger allows one to be without sorrow. Remember, he said, it's the highest austerity, this patient endurance. Quote, "Having slain anger, one sleeps soundly. Having slain anger, one does not sorrow. The killing of anger with its poisoned root and honeyed tip, this is the killing the noble ones praise. For having slain that, one does not sorrow." This honeyed tip, but poisoned root that the Buddha refers to how it may feel good when we get that sense of releasing our anger on someone who we blame for our anger. But it's really poison at its root and does not bring long-term pleasure or happiness. Indulging in anger is like, as the Buddha said, picking up a hot coal out of the fire with the intention of throwing it at someone. The first one to get burned is oneself. When one acts skillfully, on the other hand, in the face of someone's anger or trying circumstances, it's like pouring water on the fire. And when we act skillfully with patience, loving kindness, then we lack sorrow, we lack regret and remorse, and we sleep well, and we could progress on the meditative path. Remember, yesterday I talked about the questions that Venerable Ananda asked the Buddha about the purpose of sila, the profit and object of good conduct. Buddha tells Venerable Ananda, in response to his question about morality, that engaging in righteous conduct leads to a lack of remorse, and that lack of remorse, when we continue to meditate, leads progressively to the other states, the other qualities. In the Anguttara Nikaya, in the chapter of the tens, like I mentioned, he says, lack of remorse leads to joy, joy to piti, or rapture, rapture to happiness, sukha, happiness to concentration, samadhi, concentration to seeing things as they really are, which leads to disenchantment, seclusion, dispassion, knowledge and vision, nibbana. He therefore tells Venerable Ananda that the object of sila, good conduct, leads gradually to the summit. When we respond with anger that causes us regret and remorse, we don't have that joy. We don't, therefore, foster that piti, and sukha, and samadhi, and seeing things as they really are. We get stuck in the meditative path. This is something that many people don't realize about dana and sila. Many people are familiar with the Buddha's words, his advice to engage in dana, sila, and bhavana, generosity, morality, and meditation. But they don't see the connection between dana and sila and bhavana. And this sutta that I just mentioned points out that connection. That not just is dana and good conduct, sila, good in their own right, leading to other people's happiness, leading to helping to eradicate their suffering, and also creating merit and good karma for us, now and in the future life. But they also assist us tremendously on the meditative path. If you've ever tried to sit with something on your mind that you said or did that you regret, you know what I'm talking about. You get stuck. So this lack of remorse combined with dana, which provides pamoja or joy, gladness, allows us to progress on the meditative path. This is why the Buddha says if our sila is not right, if we harm others or talk harshly to others out of anger, we end up regretting what we've done and said and cannot arrive at samadhi, concentration, which is a necessary precondition to insight. No samadhi, no insight. We also cause suffering to others and generate unwholesome karma for ourselves. As one of the first verses in the Dhammapada says, the opposite of what I mentioned yesterday. Mano pavangama dhamma, mano sattha, mano maya, manasache, hasanena, hasativa, kurotiva, tato nam sukhaman veti, chayava Mind is the forerunner of all good states. Mind is chief. Mind made are they. When one speaks or acts with a pure mind, happiness follows one, like one's shadow that never leaves. And then the opposite is true. Mind is the forerunner of all evil states. Mind is chief. Mind made are they. When one speaks or acts with a wicked mind, because of that, suffering follows one, like the wheel follows the hoof of the draw ox. So Khanti involves forbearance in the face of difficult people and difficult situations. And this forbearance not only reduces the suffering of others, but assists us on the meditative path. Khanti also involves dealing with hardship and difficulty in the external world and in our internal states. And we see this most clearly here at retreat. The structure of the retreat is you have to sit for a certain amount of time. You don't get to scroll through your phone. You don't get to eat afternoon. You don't get to do whatever you want. So there's all kinds of deprivation. There's the presence of physical discomfort and pain. And there's boredom. Khanti involves the patient acceptance of these inevitabilities and tolerance and resilience. Training the mind in meditation to be even-minded or equanimous in the face of boredom and hunger and noise are important parts of Khanti, as is the patient ability to observe various difficult but transient mind states. Our minds, especially in retreat, can be very difficult to bear. One of the main guidelines that I tell people before retreat, in addition to eating less, in addition to sleeping less, in addition to using your free time doing bhavana, is this: don't allow yourself to indulge in negative mind states. As soon as the bell rings or it's time to get up from the cushion, we tend to say, oh, meditation period over, and now my mind is free to go wherever it wants. And we let go of the shackles of concentration and mindfulness and let it think. And part of us says, I'm so used to thinking without abandon, without any kind of restrictions. In retreat, I have these restrictions, but now I'm getting up and I'm walking, and all these thoughts are entering my mind. It's difficult to maintain that mindfulness, but it's crucially important. In fact, it's vital that you try to remain positive and don't let the negative mind states invade your mind and take over the quality of your retreat. And there are different methods that we can use to try to stay on the productive path and not indulge in the negativity that invariably will arise. So in order to train the mind to be beyond conditions, you have to experience some of these difficult conditions and exercise patient endurance and forbearance, accepting them with resilience, especially if our aspiration is a high one, to root out greed, hatred, and delusion, to become awakened. Let me say that again. If we want to transcend these difficult challenges, we have to experience them. Only when we experience them do we, one, see that they're there, and two, develop the ability to work with them. That's so key. They don't just go away because you wish them away. There is no such perfect world. As the Buddha says, we have to be responsible for our own salvation. And that means doing the grunt work of seeing these mind states, seeing these preferences, likes and dislikes, and aversions and hatreds, and being able to transcend them. You can't transcend them if you don't experience them. The same is true of physical pain. After this retreat, I bet to the last person that one's tolerance for discomfort is increased. One's ability to sit for longer periods is increased. It just didn't happen magically. It happened because you sat these longer periods of time, and you sat more often. So the fact is that these hardships, as well as others, are present in the world, whether we decide to train with them or not. And whether we see them as challenges to be overcome or some type of unpassable obstacle. They're there whether we accept them and try to transcend them or not. The exercise of forbearance and endurance as a form of patience, manifested as the commitment to not react or be dissuaded or give up the quest, helps us in getting beyond suffering from those very same difficulties. It is precisely that determination that allows one to undergo the hardship but doesn't give up, that allows us to transcend it. One of the ways that the Buddha recommends that we develop this patient endurance is to cultivate the Brahma Viharas, or the immeasurables, the divine abodes, metta, karuna, mudita, upekkha, loving friendliness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. We can look at equanimity in this context to Khanti. The first aspect of equanimity is to enlarge the group of individuals for which we focus our goodwill, and to include those who are indifferent to us and indeed unfriendly to us or have acted unskillfully. When we replace thoughts of ill will with thoughts of goodwill, we're much less likely to indulge in anger or other unskillful conduct. We're much less likely to forget about our decision to exercise patience. We can do this by engaging or reciting a reflection on sharing loving friendliness, and by engaging in metta bhavana, loving friendliness meditation, with the practice of directing one's metta first towards oneself, then towards one's family and friends and associates, then towards the indifferent, and then towards the unfriendly, and finally toward all living beings. We can focus on those born and those to be born, those in the 10 directions, those in the 6 realms, in the 3 worlds. And by doing this on a daily basis, we extend the number of beings and the locations of beings that we have this metta for. And this assists us in developing patient tolerance for all. A lot of times when you think about it, our impatience is because we have a very narrow view of who to love. So if our niece or nephew, who's a toddler, knocks over the vase and breaks the glass, or poops in their diaper, it's an inconvenience. Because we care about them, we accept it with patience and love. But if a strange dog ran into the house and knocked over the vase and took a poo in the house, we would treat it differently. Because our idea is different about that being. And this just is a kind of a basic example of how our actions and our feelings are limited by our own minds. So the second aspect of equanimity that's relevant to Khanti is an even-mindedness, an equanimous mind in the face of the 8 worldly conditions. The 8 worldly conditions, quote, spin after the world and the world spins after them, says the Buddha. Those 8 conditions are gain and loss, praise and blame, honor and disrepute, and pain and pleasure. When we stop to think about why we get upset, it can usually fall into attachment or aversion to one or more of these 8 worldly conditions. Someone threatens to take something from you, gain and loss, and pleasure and pain. Someone calls you names and screams at you, praise and blame, and pleasure and pain. Someone circulates a vicious rumor about you, honor and disrepute. Someone strikes you, pleasure and pain, and honor and dishonor. It is the attachment and aversion which causes our distress. If you really do not care what people think of you, you'll not get upset when they say bad things. It's our attachment which causes us the suffering. Now, that's not to say you're going to give up all cares in the world overnight. But if we're aware of this teaching and we try to employ it so that our likes and dislikes are decreasing, not increasing, if we're able to minimize those things that we're attached to, then our responses will be less and less unskillful. Similarly, if we realize that words are just flowers of air, ephemeral, insubstantial puffs that are impermanent, they are the quintessential anicca, transient, impermanent, they're gone as soon as they're spoken. Then we won't be infuriated at someone who speaks ill of us or curses at us or gives us a rude gesture in traffic. So the ability to face and overcome external challenges and internal challenges, the slings and arrows hurled by others, as it were, and whatever mental and emotional states arise in meditation, is Khanti. To practice the parami of patience is to be able to accept what happens with equanimity and understanding that all challenges are part of this spiritual path. Having said that, here's the real essence of the talk. Khanti is not just about being strong and being able to endure dukkha. And for the Bodhisattva, the aspiring Buddha, involves something else, which is much more important. In the words of Luangpo Pasano, quote, Khanti is actually a proactive engaging with experience in a way that's not getting caught up in or swayed by the reactions and impulses of either liking or disliking, of desire and aversion. It has an enduring quality to it. One of the phrases the Buddha uses to describe the impulses of the mind is a bija domanassa, desire and aversion, or a gladness, sadness type of impulse. We can try to have an enduring and patient attitude toward that so we're not reactive. When we're not reactive, then desire and aversion, liking and disliking, go their natural way and cease. As stated by one commentator, Khanti, quote, is not just the ability to wait for something to happen without anxiety or restlessness, but the ability to endure unpleasant things without distress or dukkha. Let me say that again. The ability to endure unpleasant things without distress or dukkha. So Khanti is not just the idea of patience or even forbearance in suffering, which is what the common definition is. Its literal definition of the word Khanti is not just, quote, able to withstand, but it's also, quote, unaffected by, end quote. It is when we are unaffected by the vicissitudes in life, the challenges, the slings and arrows, that we embody the parami of Khanti. To do that, we need tolerance, endurance, and composure, to be sure, and we need to be able to patiently forbear. But it is not so much about suffering for the sake of developing tolerance and developing forbearance as it is about developing tolerance and forbearance in the face of unpleasantness for the sake of going beyond suffering. When we have this ability to go beyond suffering, we can keep our composure in most of the difficult situations. There's this wonderful sutta called the Salekha Sutta, where the Buddha says, when an untaught worldling is touched by a painful bodily feeling, he worries and grieves, he laments, beats his breast, weeps, and is distraught. He thus experiences two kinds of feelings, a bodily and a mental feeling. It is as if a man were pierced by a dart and, following the first piercing, he is hit by a second dart. The second dart being the mental suffering. In the Jataka tales, the stories of the previous lives of the Buddha, is the story of the Buddha as an ascetic by the name of Kunda Kakumara. Kunda Kakumara was a meditator who had the temerity to give a talk to the king's dancing girls after the king, who was drunk, fell asleep. When the king woke up, the dancers wandered off to where the ascetic was, and the king went and chased them with a sword. He asked the ascetic, "What are you teaching?" And Kunda Kakumara said that he preaches, quote, patience. When asked to explain it, the ascetic stated that patience is not being angry when men abuse you and strike you and revile you. Wanting to test the ascetic's patience, the king very cruelly got his executioner to give 2,000 lashes with a whip of thorns to the ascetic's body, bloodying him on the front, the back, and the sides. The king then asked him, "What doctrine do you preach?" The ascetic said that his patience was not just skin deep, but was firmly fixed within the heart. The king then ordered the executioner to cut the ascetic's hands and feet off. After that was done, the king asked again about his doctrine. The ascetic said that his patience was not in his hands and his feet, but somewhere else. The king then directed that his nose and ears be cut off. When this was done, he again asked the ascetic about his patience. The ascetic, whose body was covered with blood, was patiently bearing the pain and said that his patience was not in those parts of the body either, but in the heart. The king finally kicked the ascetic's chest above the heart and left, but was said to have been swallowed up by the earth immediately and taken to the lowest hell. When one of the king's generals asked the ascetic before he died not to hold the whole land responsible for the actions of the king, the ascetic wished long life for the king and died of his injuries on that very same day. Whoso cut off thy nose and ear and lopped off thy foot and hand, with him be wroth, heroic soul, but spare, we pray, this land. The Bodhisattva, on hearing this, uttered the following: Long live the king, whose cruel hand my body thus has marred. Pure souls like mine, such deeds as these, with anger never regard. This statement that the pure never regard with anger is not about holding the reins of anger so anger is in check. It's not about not indulging in angry speech or angry actions, though you feel like it. It's not simply endurance. It's more about eliminating hatred and therefore its manifestation, anger. There's a world of difference between being angry and not showing it on the one hand, and being not angry at all on the other. When that niece or nephew of yours poops on your floor and breaks a vase, there's no anger because there's love. When the stray dog comes in and poops on the floor and knocks over the vase, there's anger because there's no love. This speaks to what the ascetic said each time that the king asked him about where was his patience now. His patience was not seated there, but was somewhere else. That somewhere else, fundamentally, is in the heart. Thus says the Buddha, the person with this kind of heart, whenever he or she is harmed, thinks, quote, this person is a fellow being of mine. Intentionally or unintentionally, I must have been the source of provocation, or it may be due to my past evil karma. As it is the outcome of my own action, why should I harbor ill will towards him? In the Majjhima Nikaya, there's this simile of the saw sutta. There, the Buddha instructs that even if one is physically harmed and attacked, one should not arouse hatred, anger, or ill will. Quote, though robbers who are highwaymen should sever your limbs with a two-handed saw, yet if you thereby defile your mind, you would be no follower of my teaching. He goes on, thus you should train yourselves. Unsullied should our hearts remain. No evil word shall escape our lips. Kind and compassionate with loving heart, harboring no ill will, shall we abide, enfolding even these bandits with thoughts of loving kindness. This speaks to not only to exercising restraint and letting evil words flow forth from your mouth, but establishing the absence of inner hatred. Metta, loving friendliness, is also a paramita in Theravada. But it's relevant here because it really is the vehicle to get beyond merely holding the reins of anger and frustration not arising in the first place. When we practice metta, we imbue ourselves with a kind of armor which shields us from the attacks of others and from situations which are difficult and horrible. It's a buffer, if you will, from the hate and anger and frustrations which invariably we all will have to encounter in our dealings with other human beings and in our lifetimes. The Buddha likened metta to a noble weapon in the Karaniya Metta Sutta. When the monks came back complaining about the spirits in the forest who were scaring them, the Buddha said, that's because you went without the right weapon. And that weapon is metta, loving friendliness. It can be projected outward to the whole world, boundlessly and without exception. It disarms others and causes them to feel good towards you. We say in the Metta Nisamsa, Manasanam Piyahoti, Manasanam Piyahoti, Devatara Khanti, Nasagiva Visambas, Satamba, and so on. Human beings adore you. Non-humans adore you. Devas protect you. There's 11 benefits. So these results of practicing metta make it much more likely that you will not be on the receiving end of hatred and anger, and also that you will not visit it upon others. When we are full of loving friendliness towards all living beings, including those to whom we are indifferent and who are unfriendly to us, then their insults and their jabs and the difficulties that we encounter are ineffective. And then we can focus on the things that really matter in this world. So thank you very much for your time today. I appreciate your attention.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
I think we might have 5 minutes for questions.
Okay.
Is that right? Anyone has any questions or comments they want to make? One of the things that normally would come up, but it's really another talk, is so how do we practice metta bhavana? And then the subsidiary to that is how do we go about directing metta to those who, by definition, we're indifferent to? And how about towards people that hate us? How do we go and do that? That's the most common question I get. And the answers are actually not just purely from the heart, like there's some switch that you turn on and boom, but rather there's a process, part of it, logical process. And I like to give the example of this. Let's start with the indifferent. When you wake up in the morning, you take the sheet off, you put your slippers on, you walk on the floor to the bathroom, you use the bathroom, you brush your teeth, comb your hair, go and have some breakfast, use the toaster. That's just a couple of things. And yet everything that you used was the product of the labor of countless beings that you don't know. Those slippers were made somewhere. That cereal that you eat, there were seeds, they were grown by a farmer, they were harvested, they were taken to be packaged, they were then taken to market, they were stocked, right? They were sold to you by the cashier, right? Countless beings are involved in your life, in everything that you possess, in everything that you do. On the way here, all these people were behind you in traffic, in front of you in traffic, on the other side of the road, and they didn't cross the center line and hit you, right? So when you think about all these people online at the post office, or at the supermarket, or in traffic, or every item that you use, it's all in different people who are involved in your sustenance. So that creates this feeling of gratitude. And once we can develop gratitude towards those that we don't know, then we're this close to developing metta. Once you are grateful to people for what they've done that you've not been able to see, then that's one way that we can then say, okay, now I get it. Now let me do the reflection. May all indifferent people be well, happy, and peaceful. May they not suffer. May they obtain spiritual success. May they have the patience, courage, understanding, and determination to overcome inevitable difficulties and problems in life. May they always rise above them with morality, integrity, forgiveness, compassion, mindfulness, and wisdom. So that's the indifferent. It's gratitude. The unfriendly is kind of similar. Think about this for a moment. If you're truly on the path, you want to perfect your character. You want to uproot the defilements. That means you want to learn. So when someone is mean to you, calls you a name, and it bothers you, they're teaching you something. You have a strong sense of self still. You're worried about what someone else thinks. You're worried about what the meaning of a word is in that language. But if it was said in a language that you don't understand, it would still have the same effect in the air and in space. But because you didn't understand it, you wouldn't have your feelings. So these people who push our buttons, in a way, they're unknowing bodhisattvas because they're teaching us. That might not be their intention. It might not be their goal. Their goal may be to harm us. But by trying to harm us, by saying mean things to us, they give us a little window, a little insight into where our minds are. And so if we're truly on the spiritual path, when people act this way towards us, we can be grateful to them for pointing it out. And during the retreat is a wonderful time to see your mind in all its glory and all its unglory. So, when the food is laid out and you're walking past it and you go, oh, right? And you're craving. There's the unwholesome root of greed. And when someone is in front of you and they're taking too long on the line and you're impatient and you're thinking about Khanti, and you can say, wow, there's greed too. I want that food now. I don't want to wait. And there's aversion, a little bit of hatred towards this person for taking so long, right? There they are. So when people push our buttons, it gives us insight into our own minds, and therefore we can be grateful for that. And once again, when we're grateful, it's very close to having metta. The other thing about the unfriendly and the difficult people is we can look at it from the point of view of karma. If you think about the fact that all of us have had many, many lifetimes and done many skillful but also some unskillful things, and we have karma to contend with, to deal with. When something bad happens to us, we can think that this is karma. And if this is karma, isn't it better that it's being visited upon me now than in some really horrible time? Like, for example, if I was in the delivery room and this happened, or if my loved one was on their deathbed and this happened, and I got this call. When you think about it, there's always a lot of worse scenarios. And the other thing is, once the karma is visited upon you, it may be expiated. It may be lived out. You may have suffered through it, and now it's taken its toll on you, and that could be the end of it, at least in that particular moment. So in that sense, the person who brings that karma to us is kind of doing us a favor. And if they're doing us a favor like that, we can have gratitude. And with that gratitude, we're like this close to metta. So both the unfriendly and the indifferent don't have to be viewed as enemies, but can be within the purview of our metta. And when that happens, then we end up more like the bodhisattva in the story that I told, who's getting tortured by the king, but harbors no hatred. He wasn't just holding back. He had no hatred. That's what the Buddha calls liberation of the heart. Right? In the Metta Nisamsam, he says that these 11 benefits will happen to one who is liberated by heart. Then there are no enemies. Then there are no people that are the object of your hate, even those who want to harm you, because they're human beings. When you think about, this is the other reflection for dealing with those unskillful people, we all, except the Arhat, to one degree or another, are afflicted with the 3 poisons, the 3 unwholesome roots of greed, hatred, and delusion. Every one of us, to one degree or another. And in any one of our past lives, we had more of it than we have now, and we had less of it than we have now. So when we look at someone who's full of these defilements, they're acting unskillfully towards us, rather than making it a personal thing, looking at them as a bad human being, we can look at them as someone who's afflicted, someone who's infected with the disease of delusion, of greed, of hatred. And when we do that, we have a measure of understanding. And when we have a measure of understanding, we can have a measure of compassion. And when we have a measure of compassion, then we can have metta. So much of this is not that we're defective in the heart. We just don't feel love towards people who hate us. It's because we're not reflecting correctly that we don't yet feel that love. Once we start reflecting on the Buddha's teachings in the right way, then it's much easier to embody that metta. Those who are suffering the most are usually the most unskillful. Those who are the most harmful, who say the worst things, who do the worst things, are so often the ones who are so hurt, who are so suffering. So once again, we can actually exercise our compassion in that way. We talk about compassion, but we save it for people who are innocent in our views. Innocent people. But guilty people, that's a different story. Someone who's addicted to drugs, well, they made a choice. Now I don't feel compassion for them. It's easy to do that. But their suffering is the same. And our lack of compassion is the same. Something to think about. So a lot of these, developing this method is from a perspective. And if we have these reflections at the ready, when times are difficult, we can go to them. We can go to them when we're challenged. And so I hope in some way that was helpful. Thank you all for your attention. Many blessings to you. May you all be well, happy, and peaceful.
Okay, thank you.